We are the Button to Christ Ministry, an organization dedicated to the spreading of the gospel to the world. Led by founder and president Patrick Baker, we are committed to reaching souls and restoring families for the kingdom of the living God. Believing in the power of prayer, God has inspired us to help those suffering from depression, abuse, demon possession, and spiritual warfare. So sit back and enjoy this program from the Button to Christ Ministry.
And happy Thursday. I hope that everyone is having a beautiful week so far showing narcissism from a psychological perspective. Now, the Bible tells us in 1 Peter 5, verse 8, be sober, be vigilant. For your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. And some of you may or may not be familiar with narcissism. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. In these days, you hear a lot about narcissists. But what really is narcissism? And tonight I just want to take you behind the scenes. As I said, from a psychological perspective, this is going to be in two parts. So tonight is part one. And then in part two, I'm going to take you through the scenes from a spiritual perspective. And one text that I want you to keep in mind throughout this entire series is Proverbs 11:9b. Proverbs 11:9b, which says, through knowledge shall the just be delivered. Through knowledge shall the just be delivered. Right? So pairing that with 1 Peter, be sober, be vigilant, because our adversary, the devil, is always looking to one up us, always looking to devour us. And as long as we know his strategies, we can be one step ahead. So, is this going? Okay. So tonight we're going to be delving into the concept of narcissism, exploring its defining traits, the behavioral patterns, and the impact of narcissistic abuse on others. So, if by chance you are in a narcissistic abusive relationship, whether that is a romantic relationship or, a friendship, a working partnership, I hope that going through this study, you will gain a deeper understanding of what narcissism is, what narcissistic abuse is, so that you'll be able to identify the impact of the abuse on your emotional, physical, and spiritual health. So the first thing, what is a narcissist? That's a buzzword today, right? And textbook definition, a narcissist is someone who displays characteristics of narcissism. Narcissistic individuals often have an exaggerated sense of their own abilities, achievements, and they may believe that they are superior to others. They typically seek validation and admiration from others while disregarding or exploiting the feelings, needs of those around them. What is narcissism? Psychology today defines narcissism as a personality trait characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration and validation, and a lack of empathy for others. Now, narcissism exists on a spectrum ranging from mild narcissistic traits to full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, which is a diagnosed mental health condition. But for a person to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, the traits have to be demonstrated in such a way that shows that their life is constantly negatively impacted, right? And according to the American Journal of Psychiatry, narcissistic personality disorder is usually prevalent, highly comorbid with other disorders, and associated with significant functional impairment and psychosocial disability. Now, narcissism has 6 core characteristics, and these are grandiosity, lack of empathy, sense of entitlement, a need for admiration, manipulative behavior, and fragile self-esteem. So we're going to go into these a bit. Here on the screen, these are just general signs and traits of narcissism. So you may find a person having an extreme sensitivity to criticism, rejection, and negative feedback. I mean, we are humans, and naturally when we receive criticism, it doesn't feel too good. But a narcissistic person usually has a reaction that is not really proportionate to the criticism itself. And the reactions can be explosive, or they can be more passive aggressive. Narcissists have an inflated sense of self or confidence, a lack of an inability to take responsibility for their actions. So they tend to always be blaming others. That is the reason why I did this or that, right? They have a tendency to make everything about themselves. They project anger and blame onto others. They use narcissistic manipulation tactics to exploit others. They lack healthy relationships. Now, because you see a person having many quote unquote friends or people liking them, they seem likable, they seem like the life of the party. Usually when you dig into a narcissist relationships, they're very, very surface level. They hold grudges and are always seeking revenge. There's a frequent devaluing of relationships or discarding people, a refusal to admit or experience vulnerable emotions, and they're overly jealous, controlling, and or possessive of others. There are generally 4 types of narcissists: the overt narcissist, covert narcissist, communal narcissist, and the malignant narcissist. Now, the overt narcissists, these are the ones that are easy to spot. When you hear the word narcissist, these are the showy, flashy ones, right? This is the overt. They are charming, attention-seeking, extroverts, bold, obnoxious, and shameless. They're usually self-absorbed, entitled, callous, exploitative, authoritarian, aggressive, and lack empathy. And what they tend to do is to use their extroverted personality, charm, and charisma to gain an audience for their boasting. Then there is the covert narcissist. Also self-absorbed, they're entitled and very unempathetic. However, this particular type of narcissists are hypersensitive to the evaluations of others. Well, they are constantly evaluating themselves in relation to others. There's always this comparison going on, this envy, and they have a great fear of criticism. So they tend to avoid the limelight, so they're not so obvious. Then there's the communal narcissist. These are the types that want to be seen as the most giving, the most charitable, the most helpful. So you find them a lot in benevolent activities, always at the forefront, philanthropy, because they view themselves and they want others to view themselves as, the most charitable, the best listeners, helpers, caring. But underneath it all, they're driven by a desire to get their own needs met. So philanthropy and charitable works are not wrong, right? But for the narcissist, they have an ulterior motive of wanting to be in these activities. And then finally, there's the malignant narcissist, and they exhibit symptoms of both narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. And they're closely linked to psychopaths. So these are the sadistic, aggressive, immoral types, like the types that really have no conscience, right? But I want to dive in a little bit deeper tonight into the covert narcissist, because These are the more difficult ones to detect. And in my opinion, they're the most deadly. Like, at least with the overt narcissist, you kind of know what you're getting, but the covert narcissists, they fly under the radar. They have a perfect outward persona, right? So they may present as introverted, shy, anxious, all of these different things, even though they actually have the same core traits as all the other types of narcissists. But just the way they present themselves is like wolves in sheep's clothing. So covert narcissists appear to be humble and shy. They're not the ones out there looking for large crowds to attract attention. They actually prefer smaller groups or more one-on-one interaction so that they have a greater level of control. They're a lot more sensitive to criticism because they have some deep insecurities. So they're extremely sensitive to any real or perceived criticisms. And their reactions to criticisms are extreme. So they may insult you or go into a sulking, silent treatment mode to teach you a lesson. Covert narcissists experience higher levels of anxiety because they focus a lot on compensating for their insecurities. So they're always scrutinizing. They could never be really in a relaxed state because remember, it's all about the outward appearance, and they are deeply afraid that their true selves would come to the front. So they're always jittery, always anxious, and looking for ways that they can hide this. They also have a self-serving empathy. So even though you may come across one of these people and outwardly it seems as if they really care about you, they're concerned about you, it is all for the purpose of gaining attention to themselves and gathering information about their victim to use against them at a later date. So you may be deceived into thinking this person is a really great listener. This person is really interested about my life, but there's a sinister agenda behind it, right? Then they have an inflated sense of self-importance. When they're in one-on-one settings, they tend to make comments about their own superiority while putting you down. And the thing about it is, if you were to tell others about this just because of the way that they present themselves, chances are people are not going to believe you. Like, this person is such a nice person. This doesn't sound like something they would say. So they're crafty in the sense that they do these things behind closed doors so no one can see. So when you start to speak out, you look like a crazy person, right? So when they are in groups, there's one way to detect them. When they are in groups, look at the body language. They show disinterest. It may not be so obvious, but just in the body language, when they view others as beneath them, they do their quick assessments, and they view others as less than them or beneath them. They give off an air of, I don't really care what these people have to say. I don't really care about these people because, I am better than. Finally, they have an excessive need for admiration. So in order to receive that admiration and attention, they may share emotional stories to get pity and sympathy, or they may withdraw, go silent so that their victim pursues them, trying to figure out, what is happening? Like, why are you acting that way? Right? Why are you not talking? All of these things are tactics to boost their ego. So signs of a covert narcissist: low self-esteem. They use introversion to hide their insecurities. They are prone to intense emotions. It could be on either spectrum: explosive, and this is, as I said, usually behind closed doors, or very withdrawn. They are highly controlling in relationships. They lack true friendships They're very passive aggressive. They avoid certain social situations, especially when they fear that, people have caught on to who they are. They tend to avoid these situations. They blame others for their problems. They are extremely envious of others. And when they don't succeed, they are angry. So failure is something that really triggers a covert narcissist into narcissistic rage. And they thrive on exploiting others. Now, let's look at narcissistic abuse. What is narcissistic abuse? Narcissistic abuse refers to a pattern of manipulative and harmful behaviors inflicted upon others by someone with narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic personality disorders. And this type of abuse typically occurs in interpersonal relationships where the narcissistic individual exerts power and control over their partner, family member, friend, or colleague for their own gain or satisfaction. And I just want to put a little pause here because as I went through the list of the traits of, narcissistic tendencies, maybe some person is saying, oh my goodness, but I see some of these things in myself, right? And the truth is we live in a fallen world. We are sinful beings. And at some point or the other, each of us displays some type of narcissistic trait. And because you exhibit a trait here or a trait there does not make you a narcissist, right? It has to be a repetitive pattern. It has to be something consistent. Because as I said, we live in a fallen world. And in the carnal nature, we're naturally selfish. We're naturally about ourselves. Okay? So it has to be a consistent pattern. And one of the things, I don't think I had it on the slide, a person that is a true narcissist typically does not have a self-reflective bone in their body. So if you're questioning, oh my goodness, maybe I'm a narcissist, chances are you're not. Because even for you to be considering, hey, it's me, that shows a level of self-reflection, which is something difficult for these people to do because they have an extremely inflated sense of self. Everybody else is beneath, they're above. Nothing is wrong with me. Something's wrong with everybody else. So there goes. Now, the key characteristics of narcissistic abuse are manipulation, gaslighting, exploitation, emotional and psychological abuse, lack of empathy, control and domination. There's a cycle of idealization and devaluation, and finally isolation. And I'm going to go into each of these key characteristics of abuse. No, manipulation. Narcissists love manipulation because when they're manipulating people, it's all in an effort to control and dominate, right? It's all about fulfilling their narcissistic supply. Sometimes the manipulation is obvious, sometimes it is not so obvious. But some common tactics that they use are gaslighting, love bombing. Again, I'm going to go into more details of these later. Withholding affection or approval as a means of punishment. There's triangulation, where they pit people against each other. There's projection, playing the victim, silent treatment, guilt tripping, scapegoating, casting the blame onto others, passive aggression, and hoovering. All of this is in an attempt to gain control, just not over you as a physical person, but over your mind. Because a narcissist having control over your physical being is one thing. But think about it in a spiritual sense. The devil will just take physical things. Nothing really. It's all about the mind, right? Because our mind, our frontal lobes, that's how God communicates with us. Our minds, our frontal lobes, that is how we make decisions, right? So if you can get a person's mind all tied up, if the devil can get your mind all tied up, then you're in this state of confusion. You can't really make decisions. You start to separate further from God. And once the enemy has complete control of your mind, that's what he wants, right? To destroy you, not just as a physical being, but a spiritual being. No, gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser seeks to undermine the victim's reality, causing them to doubt their perceptions, memories, and sanity. So, in other words, gaslighting is a narcissist gaslights a person by making them think they didn't see what they saw, they didn't hear what they heard. What actually happened was not actually what happened. Again, it's all a mind game. So when they perceive that they're losing control in a relationship, they turn up the notch by starting to twist stories, twist facts, insisting that the things that you remember didn't actually happen. And a pro tip here, anybody that feels as if they are in a narcissistic, abusive relationship, take notes. Actually keep a journal, write things down, because I guarantee you, and this is from personal experience, right? I didn't know I was in a narcissistic marriage. I just knew something was not right. And I would say certain things and I would wonder, but I'm not sure if this happened. I'm not sure if that happened. And when I would ask the party would laugh at me and tell me things like, oh, you have Alzheimer's, or take things that happen and twist them in such a way it left me more confused than anything. And when I did remember things, I will be told point blank period that did not happen. So what I would do is to actually get a little journal, and when things that didn't seem to right happen, I would write it down. I would not ask questions or say anything anymore. I would write it down. And over time, I was able to go back and look at patterns and see, oh, I was not actually crazy. The things that I saw, I did see. The things that I thought I heard, I did hear them. You know, things that happened in this that way. So that's a pro tip. If you feel as if you're in a narcissist, gaslighting can take different forms. There's denial and contradiction. So the abuser typically denies that certain events occurred, or they will contradict the victim's version of events, even when evidence suggests otherwise. You can have screenshots of what has happened, and a narcissist will take that screenshot and twist it in such a way that when you're finished, you're seeing the evidence there, but your mind is so twisted, right? So they insist that the victim is imagining things or exaggerating the situation. Then there's minimization. This is when the abuser downplays the significance of the victim's feelings, experiences, or concerns, dismissing them as unimportant or irrational. So you may hear they say things like, you need to lighten up. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You can't take a joke. Now, granted, life doesn't have to be so serious all the time. And yes, we can joke and stuff like that, but there's something different about a joke with a narcissist. Really not a joke. Underneath it is some type of dig, some type of something that really degrades you as a human being, right? But they will say things as, you can't take a joke. So then there's projection. They project their own flaws, their insecurities, or their wrongdoing onto the victim, blaming them for the abuser's for the problems that are actually caused by the abuser's behavior. So, for example, not if, because these people are liars, let's just keep it real. And maybe going to the spiritual aspect, you'll see why I say these people are just liars. They would be lying about a situation, and they would accuse you or project onto you. No, you are a liar. That's what I mean by projection, right? Then there's the twisting of reality. They distort the truth or manipulate facts to confuse the victim and make them question their memory or perception of reality. They may use selective memory or intentionally withhold information so as to create a false narrative. And finally, they undermine confidence. And this is done by constantly criticizing, belittling, or mocking the victim, making the victim more susceptible to the other gaslighting tactics because their self-esteem and self-worth is actually slowly being erased, and thereby they will be less likely to trust their own judgment. No, gaslighting has very serious psychological effects on victims, including confusion, self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and a diminished sense of self-worth. It erodes their trust in their own perceptions and undermines their ability to advocate for themselves or set boundaries in relationships. Then there is exploitation. The second thing that the third characteristic of narcissistic abuse is exploitation. Now, they usually do this for personal gain, and it takes different forms. There's emotional exploitation. So what they would do, especially narcissists tend to be with very empathetic people. And if you are a feeler, oh my goodness, they really abuse that, right? So you're a person that is sympathetic. What they would do is to manipulate your emotions so as to gain control or validation. So they would use things like your insecurities, or they would put shame and guilt and fear onto others to coerce them into doing something that they, the narcissist, want, or they play on the victim's empathy and compassion so as to meet their own needs. There's financial exploitation. The narcissist takes advantage of others' resources, whether it's through borrowing money without the intention to repay. They use others' credit cards or bank accounts without permission, or they pressure them into financial arrangements that benefit the narcissist at the expense of the victim. So usually you would find at the end of these types of relationships, the victim usually has nothing. They're left financially crippled. Then there's the social exploitation. They use others, especially the overt narcissists, they use others to climb the social ladder to gain popularity or get access to resources. So they manipulate social relationships for their own gain. So you may find them befriending influential people to advance their own agenda or using others as pawns in their social games. So usually when you find a person constantly name dropping, well, I know so-and-so, I hung out with so-and-so, a little dinger should probably go up, right? When there's this constant reference to who they know, the circles that they were in, all these different types of things, right? So then there's sexual exploitation. In some cases, narcissists may exploit others sexually by engaging in coercive or manipulative behavior to satisfy their own desires without regard for the other person's consent or well-being. And this can include sexual harassment, assault, or manipulation in intimate relationships. And I want to put a plug here. Some people believe that if you're in a marriage, you cannot be raped, but that is actually not true. And narcissists would use the covenant of marriage or even twist scriptures, right, to guilt you into non-consensual sexual activities. Then there's professional exploitation. Narcissists may exploit others professionally by taking credit for their work, sabotaging their careers, or using their influence to advance their own interests at the expense of others. And this usually creates a toxic work environment and hinders the victim's professional growth and their success. And finally, there is the psychological exploitation. And as I go through these things, you will find that some of them are overlapping. So psychological exploitation, again, exploiting others psychologically by gaslighting, manipulating, undermining their sense of self-worth and their autonomy. So this includes invalidating their feelings, their experiences, distorting reality, or using psychological tactics to break down their self-esteem and to assert dominance. Then there's the emotional and psychological abuse. So narcissists frequently engage in emotional and psychological abuse in order to control, manipulate, or undermine the emotional well-being and sense of self-worth of their victim. Common examples of this type of abuse are verbal abuse, and this would include insults, name calling, yelling, mocking, using demeaning and degrading language to belittle the victim. Then there's the gaslighting, criticism and belittling, nitpicking at everything, downplaying the victim's thoughts or ideas or their abilities. There's the blame shifting, and again, manipulation and control. Then there is isolation. A narcissist doesn't immediately isolate you from others. This is something that is done gradually. And the purpose of this is so that they can have more and more control over you, so that you're less likely to reach out to others. And sometimes you look up and you don't even realize that, years have gone by and, the people that you were once close to, family, friends, whatever, you no longer have that type of relationship. And even if there is an outward appearance of the relationship, there's an emotional isolation where you're not sharing things with them as before. The narcissist, oh boy, they love intimidations and threats. And especially if you have certain insecurities, oh my goodness, they would really use it. So say that you're a lover of animals, you really like cats. Things that they would say, like, if you don't do this or if you don't do that, I'm going to take that cat and I'm going to give it away. I'm going to sell this cat, or I'm going to kill the cat. Things like that, right? Then there's the withholding of affection or support. They may withhold love, affection, or support, and it's typically as a form of punishment or control, which leaves their victims feeling unloved, unworthy, or undeserving of care. Humiliation and embarrassment. They would publicly humiliate or embarrass the victim, either, in person, online, to undermine their confidence and self-esteem. And sometimes the humiliation is not even so obvious, especially for the covert narcissist, because they do these things with smiles. And there could be situations where for everybody else, they're laughing it off, but inwardly you feel so agitated, like, why is this person doing this? I'll give you a personal example. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was very fearful of, going through labor and all that, just watching the things on TV of what happens when you go through labor and delivery. I was fearful of that. And I was a person that I love sleep, definitely love sleep. I have a very low tolerance for pain. And there will be times I go to the OBGYN, for the normal checkup, and the narcissist would be there and would be telling the nurse things like, oh, she can't handle pain. She's gonna cry, she's gonna this, she's gonna that. I'm gonna have to be the one taking care of this child because she sleeps too much. She doesn't know how to take care of children. And inwardly, I will be feeling a cringe. And I'm dark. I'm sure if I was probably like fair skin, my face will probably be flushed red, but people will just be there, smiling and as if this is normal. And internally, I feel so humiliated. I feel embarrassed. I feel less than. I just don't feel confident, in my abilities to mother a child. So that's just a personal example. And then there's stonewalling. Now, stonewalling is a tactic used to shut down communication and avoid accountability. So the abuser may refuse to engage in discussions or provide closure, which leaves the victim feeling dismissed and invalidated. Now, the next characteristic is lack of empathy. Narcissistic abusers often disregard or dismiss others' feelings and needs, showing very little concern for the pain and suffering that they cause. No, they have a difficulty in understanding others' perspectives, right? So they have this narrow worldview that revolves around their own needs, their own desires, their own experiences, which makes it challenging for them to empathize with the feelings and experiences of others. So you may be experiencing something, and to them, that's so stupid. Like, I never experienced that. That is something unique to you. That's so dumb. Things like that. They want to understand why you would feel the way that you do or why you react certain ways that you react. They give very insensitive or dismissive responses. So when confronted with emotions or struggles of others, they minimize or invalidate the other person's feelings, or they offer very superficial and unhelpful advice, usually just minimizing the significance of the situation. They're very self-centered. They focus on their own needs, their desires, they prioritize their own interests above those of others, and expect special treatment and admiration from others without considering their feelings or their needs. There is a lack of genuine concern. Even though they appear superficially charming and empathetic when it serves their interests, when it is dealing with the concerns of others, it is very shallow. Again, they use empathy as a manipulation tactic to gain trust and sympathy from others rather than genuinely caring about their well-being. They have an inability to apologize or take responsibility. Even when they have caused harm to others, there's always a reason why their behavior is justifiable. There's always a rationale for their behavior rather than just saying, okay, look, I messed up. I am sorry. I realize that this has made you feel this way or this has affected you in this way. No. They would deflect the blame onto a dead person just not to bear responsibility. Then there's emotional detachment. They appear emotionally detached or indifferent to the suffering of others, and they may fail to express empathy or concern for others' struggles. Again, just focusing on their own needs and desires. Then there is control and domination. In every single aspect of the relationship, a narcissist is going to try to dominate. They dictate how their victims must behave, who they should interact with, what they can say, what they can do, how they should dress. And the some ways that these control tactics manifest are via intimidation. And this can involve threats of harm or actual harm, aggressive behavior, or using their physical size and strength to scare the victim. Financial control, they may exert control over the victim's finances as a means of maintaining power and control. So this can involve controlling access to money. So if you have a joint bank account, that person may be the only one to have access to it. You may not be allowed to get a card. All these statements or everything are filtered to come to them only, so that you don't know anything about the money, right? They may withhold financial resources, and or they may prevent the victim from working or accessing any type of financial independence. There's micromanagement. They micromanage their victims' daily activities, their appearance, their behavior, and this usually leaves the victim feeling powerless and dependent on the abuser for approval and validation. Again, threats and ultimatums, blame shifting, and in some cases, the control and domination tactics escalate to actual physical violence. There's the cycle of idealization and devaluation. So narcissistic abusers cycle between idealizing their victims and devaluing them. I'm going to get into this more in a short while where we dive into the narcissistic abuse cycle. This idealization and devaluation cycle creates a sense of confusion and emotional turmoil for the victim, who becomes trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment. Finally, again, there's isolation, where the narcissist systematically cut off the victims from sources of support, independence, and validation in order to maintain a higher level of control. There is social isolation, emotional isolation, informational isolation, and cultural or religious isolation. And I believe those speak for themselves. Now, isolation serves the interests of the abuser by maintaining the control, preventing disclosure. Again, as I said, if they can draw them away, think of this illustration of a sheep and a wolf. A sheep is safe when it's in the pack with the shepherd. But if a wolf gets a sheep that is lone by itself, the wolf can easily kill the sheep, because the sheep has no support, nothing. So it's the same, right? If the narcissist can get the victim away from a support system, chances are they're not going to be able to reach out for help and confide in anyone about what is going on. And then that obviously increases a sense of dependency on the narcissist for emotional needs, physical needs, financial needs, everything. So narcissistic abuse actually occurs in a cycle. There's idealization, that's the first phase, devaluation, and discard. Now, in the initial stage of the narcissistic abuse cycle, the abuser idealizes the victim. This is the stage where a victim is showered with praise, affection, attention. This is called love bombing, right? Because the victim goes to great lengths to make sure that the victims feel special, loved, adored. They may use grand gestures, gifts, declarations of love to win over the victim and create an intense emotional bond. And in this idealization phase, they are not just putting their victim on a pedestal, they're also positioning themselves for those around the victim support system to view them in a positive light. Oh my goodness, you never met anybody like that. That person is such a great person. That person is the person for you. That's the best person, right? That is what happens in the idealization phase. And this is when a trauma bond is created. This is where a certain level of trust is gained between the narcissist and the victim. Now, as soon as that trust is gained, there's some smooth sailing. There's like the honeymoon phase. Everything is nice. Everything is good. As soon as that bond is formed, and they know, because this is more spiritual than anything, as soon as that trauma bond is formed and the narcissist knows that they have their victim in their clutches, they go to the second phase, devaluation. So you have all your emotions invested in this relationship, right? Devaluation doesn't happen all at once. It is subtle. It is usually subtle. In some cases, it could be extreme. It could be a sudden shift, but usually it is gradual. The narcissist starts the criticizing, the belittling in little ways, little comments here and little comments there. They start to undermine the victim's accomplishment. So say you're a female. I can only speak from the female perspective. Say you're a female and you went to university, you were very accomplished, you have your career and stuff like that, and you're moving up in your career. A way that the narcissist starts to minimize your accomplishment, and this is when you're in the idealization phase, they'll be clapping you and cheering you on. You're the smartest. Oh, you got this. All of that, right? But in the devaluation, you start to hear things like, if it were me, I could do better. Anybody could do that. Are you so excited? Little things to just like put the holes in the balloon to let out the air. They start to dismiss their victim's feelings, right? And engage in passive aggressive behavior to erode their victim's self-esteem and confidence. And this stage is the most confusing and painful for the victim because they struggle to understand how and why is it that the person who once was so caring, the person who once was so attentive, the person who was once so loving, right, towards them is now treating them with contempt or indifference. The tone may start to change. It's almost like your very presence, your very existence is a bother to the narcissist. And any issues that come up within the relationship, if you dare to voice them, the narcissist will start to blame you for it. Well, if you would have done this, or if you would not have done that, then this would not happen. And it's a slow erasing of your confidence. Then there's the discard phase, which marks the culmination of the narcissistic abuse cycle. And this is when the abuser abruptly ends the relationship or completely withdraws affection and attention from the victim. And this abandonment can take various forms such as silent treatment, complete ghosting, outright rejection. And the abuser may discard discard the victim without any explanation, without any justification, and it leaves the victim feeling abandoned, confused, and devastated. And with the sudden rejection, it reinforces the victim's feeling of unworthiness and feels a desire for them to perform to win back the abuser's approval and affection, because they just want to get back to the phase where everything was good, the idealization phase. Now, at this time, it all depends on if the narcissist already has a source of supply lined up. This will determine the course that they take. If they have a new source of narcissistic supply, somebody that is, feeding into their ego and, putting them on a pedestal and giving them all that they want, right? If they have that, that's when they would walk away. But a lot of them test the waters first. So behind the scenes in, the extracurricular activities, whatever, they're actually testing their new supply. And if they realize the new supply is someone like, okay, I can get my foolishness over their head, they're going to leave the victim over here and go and create another victim in this new supply. However, if the new supply is aware, I should say, aware of certain things, or don't fuel them or put them on the pedestal that they want to be on, they're not going to completely leave the victim over here. They will just become increasingly cold and increasingly unempathetic towards the victim, but they're not going to completely go away. Now, after discarding the victim, some abusers may attempt to hoover them back into the relationship, right? And because a victim's self-esteem is generally so low, they may see this hoover as something so positive, like, oh my goodness, this person wants to really work at this thing. This person really wants us to get back where we once were. So this is where the manipulation tactics really come out again, because the abuser wants to gain a deeper level of control by reestablishing contact if they had gone no contact, apologizing for their behavior, or promising to change, right? So they use love bombing, false promises, guilt, and manipulation to lure the victim back into the cycle of abuse again, because from the hoovering, which is a tactic, it goes back to the love bombing. When the victim is hooked, it goes again to devaluing and discard, and it goes just like that, right? So in terms of guilt and manipulation, what the narcissist may do here is to, first of all, apologize, right? And it's not a genuine apology. It's to make the victim feel as if, oh my goodness, this person is actually sorry for, what they have done, etc. But that is all in an effort to slide in with the manipulation tactics to make the victim take responsibility, sole responsibility for the unhappiness and failure within the relationship. And again, because they study their victims, they would know who to try this tactic with, especially if it is a very empathetic person, a person that is a fixer, a person that is just about peace, a person that is just, not about the drama or anything like that. They would use this guilt tripping tactic. Triangulation. This is where they involve third parties. So remember, I said in the idealization phase, they're not just putting their victim on a pedestal and, painting themselves in a very positive light, but those around the victim support system. So that if they don't completely discard the victim and walk away, they will bring in third parties, some of the friends, mutual friends, or even family members, to convey messages to manipulate the victim's emotions. Oh, don't you see, Johnny really cares about you? Why you being like that? You haven't seen he change, and all these different things. And this will create a sense of pressure and obligation for the victim to just go back into the situation. And this can be very dangerous, especially in religious settings, because generally speaking, I don't think the church has really done a good job in addressing abuse. So there's always this natural tendency to push people or to encourage people to stay in situations that are abusive and attach the name of God, the love of Christ onto these things. And it creates a lot of pressure for the victims. Then there's intermittent reinforcement. Again, the narcissist alternates between affection and cruelty to keep the victim emotionally invested and unstable, not really sure where they stand. No, the impact of narcissistic abuse on victims is actually profound and pervasive, and it affects every single aspect of their lives: the emotional, the psychological, the social, financial, physical, and spiritual well-being. Now, some emotional and psychological effects of narcissistic abuse: low self-esteem and self-worth, anxiety, and hypervigilance. So victims may experience this chronic anxiety panic attacks as a result of the constant fear and uncertainty which was induced by the abusive relationship. So things that may seem normal for some person who has not gone through narcissistic abuse, right, may trigger a victim. They may hear a car or something like that, and because the mind stores information, something goes off, they remember something, and they're just always looking, always on the alert. Okay, this may happen, that may happen. Then there is depression and hopelessness, because the victim already has pretty low self-worth, so it's easy to sink into depression, hopelessness, and despair. Some even experience PTSD, and actually CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Generally speaking, post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, refers to complex post-traumatic stress disorder refers to people who have gone through situations that they continually live through, continuous traumatic events. It wasn't a one-off traumatic event. This is something that has been ongoing. So they start to develop intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, again, all as a result of the trauma they have experienced. Then there is the identity confusion. They don't know who you are anymore. Difficulty trusting. So abuse victims may struggle to trust others or form healthy relationships due to past experiences of the betrayal and manipulation. Then there's cognitive distortions, because victims may internalize the gaslighting and manipulation tactics that the abuser used on them, which leads to distorted thinking patterns and self-doubt. Then there's emotional dysregulation. Victims experience intense emotional ups and downs, including anger, sadness, shame, as they attempt to navigate the aftermath of narcissistic abuse. Physically speaking, a victim may experience extreme fatigue and exhaustion, insomnia, sleep disturbances, headaches, body aches, gastrointestinal issues, weakened immune system, weight fluctuations, and chronic health conditions, because long-term exposure to stress and trauma can actually contribute to the development or the exacerbation of chronic health conditions such as hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and autoimmune disorders. And I've spoken to some people who have gone through narcissistic abuse, and autoimmune disorders seem to be a very prevalent one, as well as some cancers. So yeah, narcissistic abuse is nothing light. Your body is just under constant stress, flight mode, and being in that with all the different hormones and stuff being released when they should not be, it has a devastating effect. Now, social and interpersonal effects would include isolation and alienation, loss of social support, and interpersonal conflict. Financial effects: loss of income, loss of assets, loss of opportunities for financial independence, and financial exploitation, especially if There is a divorce involved, division of assets. These people are skilled manipulators, and you can pretty much end up with absolutely nothing. And depending on the type of situation that you were in, because these people operate using smear campaigns, can actually affect your employability. Then there's the spiritual effects, loss of faith. Some victims experience a crisis of their faith with their beliefs in God or their spiritual principles, because the betrayal, the manipulation, the emotional abuse inflicted by the narcissist can actually shatter their trust in others and in divine protection. So some may be questioning, but God, where were you in all of this? Why did you allow this to happen? Right? Spiritual confusion. Victims may start to question their understanding of concepts such as love, forgiveness, and divine justice in the face of such profound betrayal and cruelty. There's a sense of abandonment, especially feeling abandoned and forsaken by God, especially if they prayed for deliverance and protection from the abuse but did not receive the desired outcome. And this can deepen their sense of despair and hopelessness. Then there is the guilt and shame, the loss of purpose and meaning. They struggle to reconcile their spiritual beliefs with the senselessness, the injustice of their suffering, which leads to, why was I even created in the first place? Like, what is my life? Why am I here? There could be difficulty trusting spiritual leaders or spiritual communities, right? Due to the past experiences of the betrayal or exploitation. And the truth is this: usually what narcissists do behind the scenes is to smear others, so paint others in a very terrible light so that you're looking at them with suspicion, right? You already have this trauma bound to the narcissist, so you really believe in everything that this person says. So when you get out of the situation, now all these things are playing on your mind, and you start to still be a little bit iffy in terms of trusting spiritual leaders and being vulnerable in spiritual communities. And depending on, if you were around people who suspected something about the abuse, and they didn't step in to help, they may feel a little bit disillusioned by the failure of the spiritual authorities or the spiritual leaders to step in and advocate for them and protect them from harm. No, the effects continue. On the positive side, though, there could be spiritual growth and resilience and the reclaiming of spiritual identity. For some people going through narcissistic abuse, yes, coming out of it, you may question certain things, but this can fuel you to go deeper with God, to cry out to God, to experience growth in a way that is quicker than, if you were just going through life all smoothly. And then you're able to get in a space where you can work on rebuilding your relationship with God, strengthen your faith, your beliefs, and coming into a deeper understanding of who you really are in Christ. And by doing that, you start to find that solace in the spiritual communities that are supportive, offer validation, and don't judge or reject you because of, what you would have walked through. So for the spiritual effects, this one pretty much is based on the mindset of the person. It can go on the positive side or it could go on the negative side. Some people have totally lost their faith in God, while others have rediscovered and deepened their faith in God. So the key takeaways from tonight: 3 pillars. Narcissists aim to control others. Every tactic that they use is a direct assault on the victim's mind, because once you can control the mind, you have the person. Secondly, narcissistic abuse occurs in a cycle: idealization, devaluation, and discard. And the effects of narcissistic abuse are profound and affects every aspect of a person's life. So if you are a person who have experienced narcissistic abuse, I empathize with you. If you know anyone who is experiencing this type of abuse, I would encourage you, to do some research to really get a deeper understanding of what they are going through and pray about ways in which you can practically help, because people going through this type of abuse generally, one, they either don't know that this is what is happening. Two, if they know that this is what is happening, they are too afraid and ashamed to actually reach out for help. And it's not something as simple as, tell a person to just leave. No, it's not that easy. It's not that simple because of trauma bonds that would have been formed. So I hope you were blessed by this presentation, and next week, please join in for part 2, because we are going to be pulling back the curtain on the spiritual aspect. This was just the psychological perspective. This is what we see on the forefront. But as we know, life is spiritual. We don't wrestle against people. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against spiritual darkness, principalities, powers, wickedness in high places. And we are going to be looking to see what narcissism really is behind the scenes and how we can spiritually fight against this demon. It is a demon. Psychology calls it a personality disorder. This thing is a demon. So with that said, have a good night, everyone. Have a blessed rest of the week. And until next time, God bless.
Thank you for tuning into this program. We hope that you're being blessed. To help grow your faith in Christ, please consider our Beginner's Bible Study every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Or further deepen your faith with our Advanced Bible Study every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, also on Zoom. Or even check out our Corporate Bible Study, which is streamed live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Zoom and YouTube. For more information, visit our website at buttontochrist.com. To further your support with us, please consider giving a donation at buttontochrist.com/donate. Any amount is appreciated and will be used for the continued growth of our ministry and the spreading of the gospel to the world. May God richly bless you. Thank
What does
Button to Christ Ministry, an organization dedicated to the spreading of the gospel to the world. Led by founder and president Patrick Baker, we are committed to reaching souls and restoring families for the kingdom of the living God. Believing in the power of prayer, God has inspired us to help those suffering from depression, abuse, demon possession, and spiritual warfare. Striving towards a higher calling, we challenge those both old and new to the faith to grow stronger in Christ, to realize and fulfill their divine purpose, and in turn receiving testimonies of God's power and grace from those who've been delivered from darkness into His marvelous light. Our mission statement, "What does it take to be free?" is met with these words: if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature.